Okay, so I'm here with my friend Pablo from Bull Bitcoin.
What
So,
up?
Pablo, it's been nice getting to know you over the past year or so. You've been teaching some classes for Rockstar members. We were hanging out in Montreal at the Bitcoin conference this past May. I think it was May, yeah.
Yep.
And it's just been cool getting to know you and some of the other guys on the Bull Bitcoin team. And from what I can tell, just from the outside and from meeting you guys, I actually don't even know how big your team is. But for meeting you, Mathieu, Kevin, Guillaume, Francis, you guys are like hardcore, passionate Bitcoiners. Like you're all mission driven there. You're all down with the mission. This isn't just like a job for you guys. It seems like you're all hardcore, legitimate Bitcoiners down with the mission, the stated bull Bitcoin mission of ending fiat, right?
Yeah,
So
that's it. Yeah, we go all in with the mission. It's to destroy fiat, destroy central banking, and our leader and head figure Francis has designed a killer team to get it done. Like I didn't apply to work at Bull Bitcoin. They actually reached out to me and they're just like, we want you to work for us. Like they just came to me and were like, this is how it's happening. Like I was like, awesome, let's go. So I'm going up on a year being at Bull Bitcoin. But I kind of got it already. I think a lot of the Bull Bitcoin clients already get Bull Bitcoin. They're very upfront with their policy and the way they see things. And, you know, like all of our branding, self-custody, Bitcoin only, no shit coins, destroy fiat. Like it goes all in hard from like the first line of the paragraph of the mission statement. So working within that team over the past, now going on 10 months, has just been such an enlightening process and really really confirmed a lot of my vision on Bitcoin that I had previously as well. But you've met a few of us. You've met, like you said, a few of the Canadian team who head out to events. So there's me, Mathieu, Kevin, Francis. But the team's just blowing up. We got so many people joining us. I was new until about 6 months ago, and I'm like halfway through. We brought on so many different people. Francis is really trying to drive very, very, very hard to deliver on the mission. And to do that, we just need more bodies, more talent, more programmers, more people in the field, more customer support. It's really nice to be in such an emerging industry and also be in a team that doesn't compromise on core values, but is still growing super rapidly. So it's that fine line of like keeping the values, not taking the VC money, not selling out, not having to bring on people who don't align, but then growing at like a really incredible rate. So it's super exciting. Thanks for having me on. I'm glad we get to sit down and have the chat. We usually cross each other in events or just before, or just after training sessions that I've been doing. So yeah, let's have a long chat. Let's get into it.
So where did they find you from? So you were already working in the Bitcoin space, or did you have some sort of Bitcoin following on Twitter? How did they find out about you?
Actually, we met in the meet space, what we call the meet space. I was driving to Montreal. I was driving to Montreal to one of the Montreal meetups. Coming out of COVID, you know, I'd been studying so hard, like a lot of Bitcoiners had throughout that period. Couple of years of lockdowns, YouTubes, tutorial guides, messing around with computers, doing everything I could. I wasn't a programmer. I was a finance guy before. But just looking at trying to master Bitcoin in as short a space as possible. But then as soon as COVID kind of blew away, I needed to hang out with some people, but everything had changed in those 2 years. I was like, nah, I can't hang out with the normie friends. I want to hang out with these degen Bitcoiners. So I looked up the nearest meetups and went to Montreal. I drove 3 hours to get to Montreal for 2 or 3 months, met the Bull Bitcoin team. I was just super enthused just being with other Bitcoiners.
Yeah.
They asked me a couple of questions like, hey, what do you do? I was working for a shitcoin exchange. They were like, let's get you out of there. And I was like, yes, please. I was doing customer service. I had a really good team and I enjoyed it. I really like helping people. That's kind of at the base of what I've always been doing, whether it be in finance, education, or now in Bitcoin. And I think they could just work that out. But then very quickly after coming out of COVID, they were like, oh, this boy's primed, man. He's like full maxi. I came out swinging out of the COVID. I was like, let's go. So they kind of fed into that and they were like, hey, just join us, customer service, education, meetups, just reaching out, doing stuff like this, the podcasts, and just trying to spread the word, really. So it's been a wild ride, but it's only been a few months since I joined. But I'm so grateful.
Yeah. It seems like you guys have a really cool community in Montreal for your Bitcoin meetups. I think like that bar we went to, there was like that meeting room upstairs that Guillaume was showing me. And he's like, oh, This is where we do I think it was like a monthly meetup up there. So is that where you were driving to, basically from Quebec City?
Yeah, well, I didn't realize actually. I drove to Montreal twice. And we went to the pub St. Paul, which is a monthly meetup. And they've got this huge free room upstairs. I think like the peak of it was when I got to organize the halving party. So the halving just went by like in when about April time. And we organized a massing halving party, and there must have been like 120 people roundabout, all showing out from Montreal, and some OGs, some people who'd been there since like the same time Francis was setting up the Bitcoin embassy. Some guys, it was their first meetup. So you've got like a 10-year gap between like people who were first showing up and people who were just showing up. But everyone was there for the same reason. Everyone's there for the halving, and we had some stand-up open mics. We had a live podcast running. We had prize giveaways. We were talking about what the halving is. It's just a really solid vibe. Montreal's always had like a very core Bitcoin community. They've got a lot of talent in the city. They've got a lot of developers, a lot of programmers, a lot of very tech-minded people, a lot of young people, also finance people as well. So there's a lot of eyeballs on Bitcoin in that city. But what I didn't realize is, like you said, I live further down the St. Lawrence. I live in Quebec City. So it's a 3-hour drive. And I was doing this drive, like, I got to meet my Bitcoiners. And then like after the third meetup, someone's like, why didn't you just go to the Quebec meetup? And I was like, wait, what? There's a Quebec meetup? They were like, yeah, there's like a few guys hanging out in Quebec. So I was like, great. And that's how I met Mathieu, and that's how I met some of the Quebec team now as well. So I help organize both of these meetups, and I was helping as a volunteer, and Bull was like, hey, do you want to just do this for us as well? So I now try and help coordinate all the meetups across Canada, which is something I'm growing into as a role, getting to know people from coast to coast, because it makes such a big difference. Like, it's a digital currency. A lot of the spaces are through like podcasts like this one, or through Twitter Spaces, where everybody's just talking all at once about whatever they want to talk about, or at conferences, which have a high entry point, like you've got to buy your ticket and show out, you've got to be available, take time away from the family. So the meetups are super important. They were for me anyway. It kind of makes everything seem a bit more real. You show out, you've been learning everything about Bitcoin, and then you get to actually meet some people who've either taken the same or a different path from you, but everyone's kind of got to the same conclusion. There's a nice consensus, a few nice debates as well about, more contentious parts of Bitcoin. But definitely just having that social layer is huge. Yeah. And myself as an educator, that's what I always want to foster, whether it be online or in what we call the meet space, is just having a social layer. Because it's the baseline transaction is a conversation. Like, you're just exchanging information. So if we can build with that as well, that's kind of part of my vision, and it's what I try and do here at Bull Bitcoin.
So what is it that brought you into Bitcoin in the first place? You mentioned you're already working at a crypto exchange, which offered Bitcoin, but then also all the different altcoins and stuff. So were you initially attracted to crypto? Was it just a job you kind of happened to stumble into? And then you actually went down the Bitcoin path? What led you into this?
I was Bitcoin only since day one. I was quite lucky. First time Bitcoin jumped onto my radar was in 2013. I didn't buy any, obviously. I just heard about it. But obviously one of my buddies was buying stuff online, stuff that wasn't easy to find in retail. So he was using Bitcoin to buy it. But he was a programmer, so he could work it out. It seemed really complicated to me and unnecessary. But he managed to buy like a certain amount of Bitcoin, purchase his products online, and then he kind of held on to some, and it tripled in value. And I was like, damn, that's cool. And then I forgot about it. And 4 years went past, and I was working in finance. I used to wear a lot of hats. I was a mortgage advisor at one point. I was a mutual funds advisor and seg funds. I'd done life insurance. I'd done call center. I did a lot of the TradFi stuff. So whilst I was doing that and hating my life because I was just sat in a cubicle servicing the powers that be and making the rich richer and the poor poorer, and I was like, this really sucks. But it was paying the bills. Well, on my lunch breaks, I was like every degen in finance, we're helping like grandma and grandparents and uncles out with their inheritance planning. But on lunch breaks, we're trading between each other and making these weird trades. And I was using a trading platform in about 2016 called eToro. And eToro. Sorry,
were you guys trading crypto or trading stocks?
I was trading a lot of stocks. It was kind of like I was trading stocks and precious metals, anything that was volatile, basically, just to kind of spice up my life at that point. It was either like I was going to jump out the window of the 5th story building I was working in or trade. So I needed a bit of adrenaline, and I was like, hey, let's see what's going on in finance. So
Interesting.
I started trading stocks and everything and precious metals, and then I started trading a little bit on Forex, foreign exchange currencies. And then around 2016, there was at the top of every chart, whether it be percentiles on 24-hour, percentiles on 7-day, percentiles on the year. Bitcoin was just topping it. The Bitcoin USD pair was the pair I started trading on. And then eventually I kept things simple because I didn't have bandwidth to measure all of these different stocks and follow the news. I wasn't very good in trader or investor. I just basically traded like end of quarter earnings reports. It was pretty simple. But then Bitcoin was moving a lot, and it was always going up and to the right. So it's like, let's use this. So I was just I was trading on eToro, using that as a platform. But one of my friends who actually had Bitcoin, he was a hacker and a programmer. He was like, it's not really your Bitcoin. I was like, what do you mean? He was like, you're trading based on the value, but you don't own the Bitcoin. I was like, okay, that's interesting. What's the difference? And then he delved into what is owning Bitcoin and what does it involve. And that was an interesting point of my life because I'd actually just came into some inheritance money. One of my parents had passed away, and I had some money showing up in the next few months, and I didn't know what to do with it. I didn't know if I wanted to buy a house or go traveling. I just wanted to save, but I was like, I knew saving was rigged. I knew, like, even before ridiculous inflation that we have now, I knew saving was all about beating inflation. But you couldn't save in something that was as liquid as Bitcoin. Everything else was locking away for 4 years, locking away for 5 years, or getting a 30-day rate on a crappy interest rate. There was no way that I could and plus all of this money, when you invest it in the banks, goes off to different places. They leverage it, they'll trade it, they'll invest overseas in stuff that I wasn't down with. I don't want to be like ruining the planet, and I don't want to be investing in tobacco and arms just because it's like the most expensive, the best return on investment. I wanted to have like an ethical portfolio without having to go all greenwashy and having to lock away money. So I was like, let's try Bitcoin. So I listened to my friend.
And wait, sorry, how did you, by that time you had determined that Bitcoin was ethical? It was an ethical place to put your money?
I don't think I'd worked out it was ethical. I worked out it was punk. I think that was what brought me in at first. It was like a big finger. It was a big fuck you to the bank that I was working at. I've always been like that, right? Ever since I was like 15, I was like, my history teacher introduced me to Rage Against the Machine. I was like, yeah, I felt that, man. I was like, the system's broken. All of the systems are broken. The political system, the banking system, the trades of information. Like there was everything that was going wrong, and I couldn't work out how to do right. It was either like get on board and stop complaining, or just don't benefit. But Bitcoin was like that middle path.
Were you just rebellious, or did you actually think, no, the system's broken, like I can't operate in the system?
I think I was a bit of both. Like it was like a self-confirming rebellion, right? I started to read up on, I really liked history for a long, long time. And I studied war for a lot. When everyone goes through that phase, I think, especially guys, when you're like 12, 13, I'm going to study First World War, Second World War, Gulf War, watch a lot of war movies. And I was like, man, all this conflict, all this violence between nation states, and then like the USA, what do they stand for? And the dollar, where does that come from? And the petrodollar, how does that work? And the environment, what's the impact? And it just basically rabbit holes into everything is pretty much corrupt. And that was a bad place to be in. It's not a good headspace to just be like, yeah, everything's fucked. I mean, there's nothing we can do about it. You want to be able to do something about it. And I've been through the leftist kind of like, hey, let's protest and wave banners and join unions. And I was like, the solidarity angle isn't working. We could be millions in the streets and nobody's going to listen because money rules at the end of the day. They'll pay their way through. And I think I lived that in the Iraq protests. We had like huge protests in the UK against the war in Iraq. There were like millions of people in the streets, but they went to war anyway. And they went to war for a false cause. So there was like so many little things like this in my background that would like, the system's broken, but I never had a way that I felt I could make a change. I tried, but I'd failed, and the collectivity didn't work. And I was like, you gotta hit them where it hurts, which is in the money. They're not gonna listen to anyone. Cash is king, and money is what pays for corruption. But if you make sound money, you can undo the corruption. And as soon as I got that part, and as soon as there were these cool people on the internet talking about Bitcoin is like a decentral, I was like, what's decentralized mean? It doesn't belong to anyone. I was like, right on, that sounds badass. Let's do it. I can join in. Yeah. You've got a seat at the table like everybody else. I was like, okay, this makes sense, but who runs it? Is it like some core values or like a society? No. It's not like a union. It's just happened. It's just like the internet. You just jump in and get involved. So as soon as I worked out that piece, I was like, okay, there's monetary value, but there's also like a political, socio-political, cultural aspect to this thing. And I was like, this is how I can express myself. So it was funny, my relative that passed away, my mom passed away, she used to work in banking as well. So I took the inheritance money, put it into Bitcoin, and quit my banking job and went into teaching. And I was like, that'll be it. I'll ride that out. I've got finance nailed. It's Bitcoin, and everything else I just want to dedicate to education.
And when was this? About 2016, 2017 or?
Yeah, 2016, 2017. I think it was late 2017. By the time I actually bought and owned my first bits of Bitcoin, I went through an exchange, got my ledger back in the day, put it onto a ledger. Thanks to my friend who helped me out there. I got it set up, learned how it worked, and then just sat on it. I went back to study to become a teacher then. I knew I was going to be studying for 4 years. So I just held my Bitcoin for 4 years, didn't even look at the price, which is like a crazy behavior. That's what we tell people now. But I accidentally did it because I had a 4-year degree, but Bitcoin works in 4-year cycles, more or less, with the halving. Mm-hmm. So it was like a happy accident of being told that's not your Bitcoin. You need to own Bitcoin, and then owning it and forgetting about it for 4 years. So I qualified as a teacher in those 4 years. But during that process, I was occasionally looking at what was going on in Bitcoin and becoming more and more interested in it. And I was like, hey, if I want to teach anything, I want to teach the thing I'm most passionate about, which is Bitcoin.
Yeah. Where were you getting that level of education back in 2016, 2017 to know the deeper meaning or possible implications of Bitcoin beyond just, trading it for that volume, for the volatility, like you were saying, to try to make a quick buck? Yeah. Where were you getting that education back then? Was it forums? Because they didn't have all the books and the podcasts back then.
Yeah. I think I just got it over drinking a lot of coffee with my hacker friend. We just sit down and we just talk about it. And he's managed to give up the programmer job. He's an artist now called Rattel. He makes comic books because of Bitcoin. But we just sit down and we go over it. And I'd work out the infrastructure first. And I was like, I came at it from like the tech angle, but as a non-tech guy. I didn't know how the internet worked, how TCP protocol worked. I was just a user of computers. I was never anyone, I didn't even have any config settings on my computer. I was very much a user of computers, not a power user. But it gave me an into that as well. So I was like, so how does a node work? How does the ledger get distributed? How does public key, private key encryption work? And I started just to delve into all of that. I was like, it was fascinating for me. It was like the angle I'd always wanted to get involved with computers. I was like, hey, I can bootstrap my way into getting a bit of tech knowledge by learning Bitcoin. And aside from that, my buddy being very technical gave me a lot of technical information. So the first thing I ever read about Bitcoin was the white paper, which was released by Satoshi, which it was crazy. Bitcoin, Satoshi was proposing in the white paper. I recommend everybody read it, even if you don't understand it like I didn't. Give it a read. It's something like 9 pages. But the Bitcoin white paper, basically, Satoshi lays out that he's found a solution to a problem. But the problem for me was I didn't even understand what the problem was. Digital cash, why hadn't it worked in the past? E-cash, why were things the double spend problem? There were all sorts of complex issues that meant that money hadn't been digitized prior to Bitcoin. And I had to understand those, and I worked out those as a beginner level so that I could understand Bitcoin and how Bitcoin worked and what problem it solved. And then once I got that, I was like, damn, okay, this is quite an interesting invention. And obviously the price was going up. When the price rips, it gives a lot of confidence. But even when the price came down in 2018, 19, when I was studying, I was still trying to understand how Bitcoin worked. So the second thing I read after the white paper was Mastering Bitcoin by Antonopoulos. It's like a really tech book. And I skim read it and read it again and went back and read it again. And I was maybe understanding like 5% chunks at a time. But every time I'd like piece things up, brick by brick or something, I was just able to get through it to the point where it was feeding my curiosity every time. And then the podcast blew up in 2020, and then everything became a lot more accessible. And then there was a community online, and there were forums, and there were podcasts and Twitter Spaces, and then meetups. So I was really lucky to have got in so early and have not given up on it, because it was a steep learning curve. If people think it's steep now, it was steeper back then. And that's the difference I want to make. I want to smooth out that learning curve and make it a bit easier for people. But yeah, that was pretty much how I found out about it.
Yeah, it's interesting coming from the TradFi world that you just went all in on Bitcoin back then. Even like you weren't were you bringing any baggage from your TradFi world, like second guessing yourself, thinking, what if I just put it in mutual funds, track the S&P 500, or was just that not a thought in the head?
I hated it. I hated it all. I hated everything it stood for. Like one of my favorite films is American Psycho. And they're just like, it's just like the epitome of this 1980s Wall Street guy, sat and doing nothing and raking in so much commission, and the hedonistic lifestyle and the elitism, and the not giving a crap about what you're investing in. It's all about your return on investment. And I worked out it was just the easiest way we were selling the world short. The government's taxing future generations by printing the money, and the elite are just taking that money because they're the closest to the printers, using the Cantillon effect, plowing it into whatever portfolios they have, getting rich on the back of the working classes and the middle classes. And that's the system. That's it. And the only way that you can aspire is to try and be like one of these people that you hate. I was like, what's the point? Like, that's not an aspiration for me. I wanted to be like the punk street poet, but like actually have savings and a future and have something to give to kids. Why do you have to choose between values and like future investment? You can, when you can have both. And for a long time, it was so hard. I was in ethical investment funds. I was at a cooperative bank here in Quebec and in the UK where I'm from. I was doing everything right, but I was just spinning my wheels, and I could get into housing, but you end up buying houses you don't want just so you can eventually have the house you do want later on down the line. It's just such a waste of energy. So I just took a stupid shot. I was like, everything, Bitcoin, let's go. And it was maybe stupid, but hindsight, in Bitcoin, usually doing the most stupid thing in the short term looks like the smartest thing in the long term. Everybody who's been called a genius now in Bitcoin was called crazy for so long. And it's just adjusting your time preference and believing in something. And it's the opposite of what people in finance tell you. Diversify, and you've got to have these spreaded portfolios because you never know. In the Bitcoin realm, that just shows lack of conviction. You've got to know what you're about and take a stand and take the jump. And if you want to do it bit by bit, $100 every month, or if you just want to sell the farm and buy Bitcoin in one shot, but just take steps towards what you want to have and who you want to be. And everything else is just bullshit. Like all of the other portfolio management, I get people make a lot of money off of this, but it's as much in their interest as it is in yours. So it's a shark's game out there. Bitcoin's for everyone. You get a seat at the table and that's it. And that's what we do in Montreal. We gather together. Doesn't matter how much Bitcoin you've got. We're all Bitcoiners and no one else is in charge. It's a really great hierarchy. And I think that was it. It was about the share of power, and the hierarchy was a flat hierarchy within monetary policy. So I was like, how can you not get involved in that with what I've been through?
Was it just the education and thinking through things from first principles and really figuring out how this new system works, and then also having a grasp of how the old system works from TradFi, just that gave you that conviction to be able to trust yourself, even though there was probably people in your life that thought you might be a bit crazy?
I didn't tell many people, honestly. Like, I kept it real quiet to myself, first of all, because you don't want to tell people exactly what you've done with your money and that you got it in Bitcoin and stuff. Discretion is always advised in Bitcoin. But in terms of like having a first principles approach, I think there were other things that happened. Like, I remember the 2008 and 9 crisis, the financial crisis. And I remember Occupy Wall Street and how that happened. And that's how I ended up working in TradFi, because they had to regulate a lot of industries like mortgages in the UK. So they needed to hire new staff. So I got hired off the back of the financial crisis. So I already felt that. But I remember like one of my pain points was like, I remember talking to like a woman in Northern Ireland. She was a client, and she had negative equity on her property by a lot. And she was like, I can't afford to make my payments because my husband just lost his job. But if we sell the house, we end up homeless and in 80 grand of debt. And that was because of mismanaged mortgage portfolios, you know, overvalued properties and ridiculous interest rates. And I was like, man, it's a sick system out there. So I think a lot of that, and then working out that Bitcoin solved that problem. And it's nothing Satoshi even laid out. I think Satoshi, like in his forum post later did, but in the white paper, it just talks about the technology of the thing. But then very quickly, when you buy into like the cultural aspect of it, you're like, okay, this thing can make waves. And then the more people start to criticize it, then you get really like maxi and you start defending it. But I don't know why, I just went all into it. I gotta lie, like I gotta confess, everybody has a shitcoin story. Everybody, but every Bitcoiner will have at some point traded into altcoins, or what we call them shitcoins, and traded that. And mine was $200 of Litecoin. That was it. I was quite happy about that. I was like, oh, let's try it out. If Bitcoin's gold, then Litecoin's silver. And like, I was just lazy. I remember like I moved that Litecoin back into Bitcoin after 6 months, because I was like, I don't want to have to follow two currencies. I was just like, why? Like, why? If I believe in this one currency, why do I have to hedge my own confidence? Like, I don't want to do that to myself. I don't want to self-doubt. I've done as much due diligence as possible. And at any point I can sell this thing because it is super liquid. I could just sell out. Like I could sell out all of my Bitcoin tomorrow. So there was no risk in going 100% in. If at one point you came across something that wasn't working for you, or you didn't agree with, you just sold your position and you moved out. But from 2017 till now, I've got more conviction than ever, because it's like a self-confirming community. Like the more stuff happens, the more reasons there are to believe in it, the more development happens, the more companies like Bull Bitcoin that show up, and the things we do and the way people operate and the content and the culture and the art coming out of all of this space now is just confirming that it is the biggest talent pool across the globe right now. Bitcoin is bringing in people from all realms. So it's just got this like escape velocity now, which is huge. So I'm just going to ride it out and try and escape with the ship, you know, with the mothership.
Yeah. So on that point, what are you seeing from working inside a company like Bull? Like obviously you guys are expanding across Canada. It sounds, I think you're in Costa Rica as well. Where are you guys expanding, and just what are you seeing in terms of Bitcoin adoption, in terms of Canadians adopting it, in terms of maybe Costa Ricans adopting it? Just what are you seeing from working inside that company day to day?
Yeah. From either a national level, international level, or even on an individual level, reasons for getting into Bitcoin are all very unique. So I do one-on-one sessions as part of our onboarding here at Bull Bitcoin. If people are stuck, I'll usually reach out and call, and we'll help them out. But always my first question is like, so what brought you into Bitcoin? And I've never had the same answer twice.
Really?
People have all found different ways, and there's a lot of overlap, you know, like for a current wave of Bitcoiners right now, like COVID, whatever side people were on of restrictions, mandates, policy, monetary or none, that was like a key time in our society where everything, the plug was pulled and we were all sat at home, and the Bitcoiners, they decided, or the pre-coiners, they were like, hey, I need to get into this Bitcoin thing. I need to protect my generational wealth. I need to look after myself. I need to clue up and stay up to date. So like a big overlap with a lot of individuals is that they learn during COVID through podcasts, through education like this, through conversations. So that's on the individual basis, but also people have different stories about, you know, how they've had businesses fail for whatever reason, and they're trying to build back up, or artists who want to work for themselves but have never been well paid, or people who've come into money but they don't want to buy a house, young people who just want to move around, they've got an online digital nomad job, or retired people who are just seeing that living in Canada and the costs of living are growing up and up and up, and they want to put some retirement money away. People who are selling property, there's all sorts of people, and it's just in Canada. And there's kind of like another overlap is not just the COVID issue, but then what came off the back of COVID, which is inflation. That's a stealth tax, and it applies to everyone. It doesn't matter how much cash you have or how many assets you have. Inflation always plays in. So even if people aren't fully conscious of the percentages and the Q-on-Q releases and how the Bank of Canada's, what they've announced last week, people are feeling the pain, people are feeling that temperature rising. People are going to the grocery store and finding it harder to make ends meet. So financial pressure is growing. And that's not just Canada. Like, it's the same back home in the UK. People are talking about the cost of living crisis with events like the war in Ukraine, which has put like prices of gas and electricity through the roof. So globally, like economically, things are harder, but people come at it from different reasons. But the squeeze is the economy right now. And then if we look overseas, we've got alternatives. So you've got like that dire situation where people feel the pressure, but then you've got like citadels of hope and shining lights, and Costa Rica is one. That's where our founder, Francis, is living at the moment in what they call the Bitcoin jungle. And what they've managed to do is create a circular economy using Bitcoin and Bitcoin-based apps. There's hundreds and hundreds of local farmers, hotels, businesses, from mechanics to hairdressers to everything you could want, massage therapists. They have everything. If you jump onto Bitcoin Jungle's website, you can see they've actually done it. Like, they've done it on a local scale around this one village in Costa Rica. So you can see, like, while we're out here in the West, in the developed world, feeling the pain and trying to wonder what's coming down the road, there are people in developing countries that are flourishing and their projects are growing and their businesses are growing, and they have more hope for their kids rather than less, and they're just on the right side of history. You can feel it. So there's a huge disparity, obviously, between the economic weight of a country like Canada and Costa Rica, but in terms of the innovation and the technology behind it and the open-mindedness, places like Costa Rica are adopting way quicker than anywhere like Canada, because we're holding on to what we had rather than embracing what could be ours. So we're at this weird transition time where it's all about early adoption. Who's going to be the first to adopt? They're going to be the people who win out in countries like El Salvador, countries like Costa Rica, even small places like Madeira and Nigeria, maybe. We're all looking to find out where these pockets of innovation are going to be. But so between Canada and Costa Rica, that's what's happening. But in terms of globally, we're looking at expanding to other countries as well. Announcements are going to be made this year about Bull Bitcoin expanding, and we're really excited about it because, like I said, everyone gets a seat at this table. It's not, it's not how much do you have in your pension fund. It's not where's your fixed address. It's for everyone. So we're trying to deliver on that mission. It's not just within Canada. We're going to grow big time, and this year is going to be a huge year for us. I can definitely tell.
Yeah, that's awesome to hear about, man. In Canada, do you think things just have to get bad enough for people to start seriously adopting this in bigger waves? Because you have places like El Salvador, Costa Rica, developing countries, or a country like El Salvador that's fully adopted it as a legal tender. Like, they kind of really hit rock bottom with the amount of crime they had there. You and me, actually, we had dinner with someone interesting from El Salvador, right? In the Montreal conference. And just talking to this girl that was from El Salvador and seeing the excitement that she had about how her country was transforming was just amazing, because it just confirmed what you see on Twitter. It was like, no, this is a real thing. Like, this country is turning around.
Yep. I think one of my best stories that I heard when I was working at my previous company before working at Bull, I was doing like basic customer service stuff, and there was a guy who called up and he just wanted to change his address. I do that type of thing day in, day out. Forgotten password, changes of address, which shitcoin is the best one. I was doing all those questions, but the guy was like, I want to change address. And I was like, okay, cool. Where are you moving? He was like, I'm actually changing country. Is that going to affect my services? Like what I have access to? And I was like, yeah, where are you moving from? He's like, I'm moving from the USA. I was like, cool. You have access to more or less everything with our company. Where are you moving to? He's like, I'm moving to El Salvador. I was like, dude, forget the address change. Tell me all about it. Like, why? How? What's going on? And he told me, like, he was originally from El Salvador. He was living in, like, the California area. And he'd moved out with his parents at, like, 6, 7 years old. His parents left El Salvador because they wanted a better life for him. and his family. So he grew up in LA or around the LA area, California, I forget. But he was like a man now with his own son who was 6 years old. And he'd seen California just drop in terms of quality of life, in terms of affordability, in terms of infrastructure, in terms of crime, in terms of cost of living. And he was like, it doesn't feel like home anymore. And I was like, so why the move back to El Salvador? He's like, buddy, I'm speaking to my aunts, my uncles, my cousins. Everyone back in El Salvador is telling me that it's not just headlines and memes. He's like, it's true. Like, my auntie sits out and like, we'll talk to neighbors now after sunset. They didn't used to do that. Sunset, everybody inside. She was like, she hangs out again on the porch, just like getting to know her community, and kids can play out again now safe, and the schools are coming back and businesses are growing. And he was like, I want to give that to my son. I don't want this kind of Californian nightmare where things are going to go downhill until the government maybe bails them out or doesn't. He was like, I want to be in charge of my own destiny, so we're moving back to El Salvador. I was like, good man. And I changed his address right there and then. And I sent him like all the resources he needed and everything, and that was it. But yeah, just to conclude on what you were saying, that type of hope is something that we all need right now. And Canada, to come back to your original question, Canada's swinging further and further away from that hope, I feel. We might have hit peak fear and peak disillusionment, but we've just kind of accepted it. And that's such a shame. Like, as you can tell from my accent, like, I'm an immigrant here. I migrated here from the UK. I chose to be in Canada. You know, a lot of people, patriots and very Canadian people, like, yeah, like Canada sucks right now, but I wouldn't go anywhere else. It's home. I could just go back home, but I don't. I'm still really bullish on Canada. I really, really am. And I think the reason is things usually happen out of studying history. Like I was saying when I was reading up when I was a kid, I've always worked out that things work in like a pendulum. Things have to swing far enough one way for them to swing back the other way. And I'd like to hope that we've swung far enough one way that I have enough conversations with people in the street who are not Bitcoiners, but we rhyme on the same things. I have enough conversations with the Bitcoiners, with people who are not Bitcoiners, and they've already started to sound like Bitcoiners. Yeah. I think that kind of like culture and that kind of like a little bit of anger isn't a bad thing if you know how to channel it and something positive you can do with it. And I'm sensing that there's a lot of anger, but people haven't worked out what to do with it yet. And once you find that like Bitcoin unlocks a whole garden of hope and opportunity, and you can, the key is a bit of anger. That's why I got into it. You know, I was pissed off with the TradFi system. But for Canadians watching this right now who are feeling like, yeah, what can I do? I mean, you know, is Trudeau going to ever step down? Not really, because he's having a great time taking his $2 million holidays. When's the next election? Well, it's not till next year. And like, who's going to stand? We don't know. Is it going to be a better guy than the last one? We don't know. Well, just step away from all of that and just move towards something that is legitimately on your terms. You have a seat at the table, and it'll open up that hope that other countries like El Salvador have tapped into. Yeah. So, you know, I do weigh on the hopeful side of the pendulum, but I'm pragmatic enough to know that if it does swing even worse and worse and worse, it's going to make the snapback quicker. And so that's already decided for me. Everything gravitates towards Bitcoin. It's just a huge growing black hole of energy and talent and time, and it's there's nothing you can do with it. It's going to swallow up Canada eventually, even if they fight it and ban it, even if they bring out a central bank digital currency. Eventually, Bitcoin will win. That's how strong my conviction is on this, because I've looked at it from the grassroots up, and it's a non-killable beast, and you can either join or fight. But at the end of the day, the world is pivoting right now, and you can choose when you want to get on board. And like I said, it's all a question of early adoption. It gives you the best advantage. But also, I don't believe in elitism either. So I think it is for everyone. I do think this will be rolled out globally, and I think eventually everyone will benefit. But it's up to us when we decide when's day one, when we start to take that switch and be like, no, I'm going to take that seat at the table.
So right now it takes a lot of education and that learning curve, like you mentioned, for people to kind of get into it, and especially to get into self-custody and really understanding the Bitcoin ethos and some deeper meanings of what it might mean for the world and how it could change humanity and society and all these structures that we've, lived in our whole lives. It's a big learning curve. For the average Canadian, do you think do you think it matters that they need to go down that learning curve eventually? Or do you just think that the benefits of adopting it become so obvious, kind of like the internet? Because I think about the internet, like I still don't know how the internet works, how Wi-Fi works. I don't know the intricacies as well as I do for Bitcoin, because I've just found a passion with it and started studying it more. But with the internet, like I don't truly know how it works, but I just remember growing up, we had dial-up when I was a little kid. And then just slowly over time, all of a sudden you have a Wi-Fi router. And I was pretty young at the time, so like I didn't really fully function how society was changing and how internet was being adopted in my household. But then we had like MSN Messenger, right? And we were in MySpace, and we were like, you know, messaging my friends after we got home from school. And then that turned into Facebook. And now we had this social platform where we could post on each other's walls and stay connected. And just the benefits became obvious. But I didn't know about how any of it worked. I didn't have education about the internet. I didn't care about the implications of society. Do you think Bitcoin's going to take a similar role? Because I was having this debate on the weekend with a friend of mine, and I was like, to your point, I'm like, dude, you're 99% there. I just think I found a solution, and you don't think that Bitcoin is a solution or a viable solution. Because his argument was just people aren't going to take the time to learn about it, to learn about holding your own keys and stuff. And he was like, but the system we're in is unsustainable. And he's like, yeah, the system we're in, like, it just cannot sustain. But he's still kind of hanging on because he's like, I just don't trust Bitcoin enough. So I don't know, like people need to develop that trust, but I don't know if it's just, I think one day, hopefully it just becomes like the benefit and the use case is obvious for people. But I don't know. I don't know how that plays out.
I suppose it depends on like a bull Bitcoin, like our key mission, one of our new phrases, one of our new like visions of what we actually do. You know, our mission is to destroy central banking and destroy fiat. But our strategy is what? Well, Francis was designing all of these different tools which would enable our users to become more sovereign individuals. So the strategy of what Bull Bitcoin delivers on is we're engineering sovereignty. And that's like quite a complex idea, but essentially the question for people like your friend is, how sovereign do they want to be? How much independence do they want to have? How in charge of their own destiny do they want to be? And depending on the answer to that question, depends on how much you need to know about Bitcoin. Because like you were saying with the internet, when the internet came about, we're more or less the same age. I remember the same thing, dial-up through to broadband, MSN Messenger, Facebook came out, Twitter came out, and then everything was just online. But my regret was that I was always just a user of the internet. I wasn't a power user or a developer, or I didn't understand what was going on under the hood. I just used the internet. So what does that give? 10 years later, 20 years later? Well, I have accounts for everywhere. Facebook, I got an account. Twitter, I got an account. MySpace, I had an account. And Amazon, I buy my stuff on there. And eBay, I used to buy my stuff on there. But the one thing that's in common is that I'm a user of all of those services. And the exchange is that they take my data and I give them extra information about myself. And they give me a kind of crappy service. But that's just how it is. Like the internet is great in terms of freedom of information, but in terms of it being like a gated community and in terms of all of these Silicon Valley companies basically having taken over ownership of the internet, it's not the place that I want to be at. Like I have friends who know exactly how networking works and they'll set up home servers and they'll self-host. They don't use Apple Cloud. They'll have their family photos on a local server in their house. They'll be like power users, you know, they use the internet as it should have been used, as a free and open network. And it's a domain in which they feel sovereign, they feel in control. They don't have to accept terms and conditions that they don't agree with or can't be bothered to read, because they got in early and they took the time and they wanted to be more independent and sovereign. And right about now, we're in that same stage with Bitcoin. And that's the biggest dilemma, is that people who want quick and easy will sacrifice independence. So there are a million ways you can buy Bitcoin now. And the quicker and unfortunately easier it is, you're sacrificing something along the line, whether it be giving over a lot of extra information so it can be sold to marketing companies, or whether it be not owning your Bitcoin, or whether it be investing in the ETF, which isn't real Bitcoin. You know, there's lots of ways, but And this is why the point of education is super important, because the correct path, which is the bull Bitcoin path, which is the sovereign path, which is what Bitcoin stands for, is a steeper learning curve. But it's proof of work. You know, you will reap what you sow from putting that time in. And it doesn't have to be a, you know, drinking from the fire hose approach. That's why we exist. We will happily guide people through the process of learning enough every week just to get to the next week. And then you'll learn it. Like I was reading the white paper, 5% at a time is what I understood. But I've built up a solid amount of knowledge over a long time preference. But I didn't want to learn everything about Bitcoin in 1 week, and I don't understand it. It sounds crazy. I can't trust it. So I'm out. You don't have to trust Bitcoin. You can verify Bitcoin, but to do that, you've got to do it bit by bit. And you've got to go through with and there'll be a lot of noise out there as well. You'll read 2 articles on the same subject and they'll be saying 2 different things. You got to be a critical thinker. You got to be willing to take some responsibility for your actions. And you've got to believe that you're a powerful individual. And until you have that self-affirmation, it's going to be very hard for you to adopt Bitcoin fully. But I think in this modern age of globalized, conformists, .com sponsored, where we're all just users and NPCs in this game, there's a lot of people who want to take agency of their own lives. And I think learning Bitcoin is a great model for how you can take ownership of every aspect of your life, whether it be money, whether it be food, or whether it be the way you work, whether it be your attitude towards family and travel. You become more powerful if you start to take those small steps towards learning something which empowers you. I mean, why wouldn't you? But some people do just want quick and easy and the trust, like somebody else will handle it for me. And that's what TradFi has always been about. We've always trusted someone else with our money. So why to do that with Bitcoin is against the point, really. Because BlackRock and Fidelity or the Bank of Canada with their shitcoin that's going to come out, none of these people really care about you. They don't. They want their cut, they want their commission, and they'll do everything they can to retain as much power and give you the least amount of service that's viable that you'll pay for. You don't want to be a user. You want to be a participant. You want to be somebody who's out there and feeling like you don't have restrictions. And Bitcoin is open like that, but it takes small steps.
We've always had that same thesis here with investment properties, like going out and buying a piece of property that you own. And I know you don't have like pure ownership of it like Bitcoin, but you had a lot more control over it and something in your name, as opposed to buying mutual funds or stocks through a brokerage account or having a money manager. This was a piece of property that you own, that you have full control over how you want to design the property, how you want to renovate the property, a strategy for renting out that property, to have direct cash flows coming to you and to your bank account. So you could influence the expenses, you could influence the income, and you had something that you had sovereign control over to some degree. Right? There's definitely a scale of self-custody, and rental properties are, somewhere on the higher part of that scale, with Bitcoin being at the final stage of that scale of something you have, full control. Gold also being down there as well. Yeah. But that was always the idea, because you control is equal to responsibility, and responsibility is equal to control.
Exactly.
You could take control over your personal finances and the trajectory of your overall life by taking control of those rental properties. That was always kind of our ethos here. And we find it very similar to the Bitcoin ethos, right? Yeah, do you want sovereign control over your financial future, or do you want to outsource that to these people that don't really care about you, as you say, that are looking for their commission and looking for wherever they can get returns on their money, no matter where it's invested in? Like the amount of people that have money in the S&P 500 because it's become monetized, because the money's broken, similar to houses, but just the amount of people who knows what companies even make up the S&P 500? Nobody knows. Mm-hmm. You probably couldn't list 10. You'd list the Magnificent Seven, which is where all the returns come from, and then 3 others. I don't know, Disney or something like that might be up there, but you don't really know. And do you agree with those corporations? And do you have any idea what's going on, or do you just not know where to put your money because the money's broken, right?
Yep. I mean, it's like betting on a lame horse, but instead of just like changing the horse, you just get more horses in the race, and you're like, well, one of them might win out of the luck of like which is the least crappy horse out of all of them, Yeah. But in terms of it being a bearer asset like real estate and like gold, like you were saying, It totally is. And if you compare it to like the medieval, like owning property back in the medieval times in serfdom would make you a baron, right? If you owned a lot of land, you'd be a baron, and feeling like a baron in the Middle Ages would have been pretty awesome. But if you didn't own land, who were you? You were further down the serfdom ladder. You were a serf or a peasant, and you would have to do what? You'd have to just pay in with your labor and your time, and you get pretty much nothing back, false sense of security and maybe an army to protect you, and you get some arable lands, but it was never enough, and you'd just be in the struggle. And then, like, if anybody out there has bought property or bought gold or is buying or has bought Bitcoin, you get that like little baron feeling. You're like, I feel like I own something that's my own domain now. This is mine, and nobody can take this from me. And it's not seizable like gold or like lands. Like, you know, if war broke out in Canada and the Russians invade tomorrow, like, I can just up and leave my Bitcoin, you know? I can run to the south or wherever it takes me. So like in a digital age, it's the only digital bearer asset. So the value of that just in itself is huge. And then when you look at how it's backed by energy and you look at how many people are interested in it, it just adds more value to this thing. But as a base layer, it's the first and only digital store of value that we do have at the moment as a bearer asset. So it's digital gold. Everybody said it since 10, 15 years now. It is digital gold. And when you buy some, it does feel like holding gold in your hand. It gives you that same feeling of, okay, I'm in charge now. I'm in charge now because this is mine. And I think that's super empowering.
I think it's dematerializing gold. I think it's dematerializing property. I think it's dematerializing ownership, wealth. I think it's all collapsing down into this thing that's, okay, provably scarce and provably secure. It's so decentralized. It's bounded by massive amounts of energy so that you can't attack it to take somebody else's Bitcoin. This thing's actually like this scarce good that can be transacted with anyone else on the internet. It's a new paradigm. It's something we've never seen before. And I think that's what causes just so much confusion, so much anger towards it, people fighting against it. It's got no value. It's nothing. It's in the air. It doesn't exist. Sure. But I mean, look at how much of the rest of your life that you spend online. Look at how all the music in the world has collapsed down into Spotify, and you can now stream it any song you want, anywhere you want, anytime you want. Look at how all the libraries and knowledge in the world has collapsed down into your iPhone, into Google, into ChatGPT. Look at how all the knowledge work is being collapsed down into AI right now. Can you see a similar thesis playing out with property and gold and ownership collapsing down into a scarce kind of digital thing? I think I can, right? But you just have to buy into that kind of digital belief that it's software is changing the world.
And I didn't get that until I'd really understood, like as a non-monetary thing to understand, is the idea of like public key, private key encryption. That took me a while. It took me, like I'd come back to it every like few months and be like, hey, how do I get that? Like, how do I sign a message? How do I know it came from the right person? And that's technology that existed before Bitcoin. But that idea of having a digital signature that can be verified and can't be faked applies to Bitcoin. It's the only way you can move Bitcoin is with your own private key. You have a private key that'll send Bitcoin away. So no one else can spend it in your place. No one can take it from you unless they have that private key. So that's one of the bases. But again, like you were saying, with things changing in technology now, like with AI, like just in the last, like since Saturday, what happened in Pennsylvania with the assassination attempt on Trump, there's been so much content that's been pushed out by AI. It's fake Joe Biden's, it's fake Donald Trump's doing like 50-cent raps and stuff like this, like we kind of know it's fake, but it's going to come to a stage where the technology, you're going to have to work out what is and what isn't fake, because it's becoming hyper realistic and it's permeated every aspect of culture and society and the economy. So how in a digital world do we ensure authenticity? And the way you do that, and it's going to apply not just to Bitcoin and money, it's going to apply to all types of communication, is the public key, private key encryption. So if you, Anthony, send me a message or we're recording a podcast, you can sign it with a public with a private key that we know is yours because of the public key. So I can verify everything that you send to me. I'll be like, oh yeah, it's legit from him. It's not from anybody pretending to be him. And this is going to happen throughout media, throughout news. The technology that Bitcoin is already leveraging is going to apply to the entire internet eventually. And you can see that with projects like Nostra, which is basically going to replace social media. You won't get fake accounts and trolls. You won't get bots because it's not worth it, because you can't pretend to be somebody else. So we're going to see big changes in technology generally. And it's always been changing. It's maybe stayed quite stagnant for a while, but there's a huge market for attention and there's a huge market for legitimacy. And that's outside of Bitcoin, but Bitcoin has already worked that out, because the one thing you want to be sound on the internet is your money. And we've fortunately already got that worked out, so we can build everything else on the back of that. So Bitcoin will have huge impacts, not just on money, but it'll have huge impacts on how we use technology in general and how we verify things. It gives us a base layer. It's the base layer that will scale out the new phase of the internet. So yeah. I'm very bullish on it. Yeah.
Do you think that stuff will happen on the Bitcoin network, applications on top, the public key, private key, or could it be on other types of blockchains? I'm not exactly sure how that plays out.
It could work out using the same algorithms that Bitcoin uses. For example, like SHA-256 is one of the encryption bases that Bitcoin uses for its transactions of sending and receiving and generating. So generating addresses. So that's an algorithm. So it's mathematical. It was created by the military and released publicly. So that type of encryption can be leveraged. It was before Bitcoin was created, and it still is now. And you can sign your emails. I use Proton Mail, and you can sign your emails with a PGP encryption. I don't know if everything will be built on Bitcoin, because at that point, if you're trying to build everything on the base layer of Bitcoin, the blockchain of Bitcoin, you're going to have to make it into a shitcoin, right? It's going to have to accept dog photos, and it's going to have to have 2 million transactions every 2 seconds, so no one can run it, and you compromise on all of its properties, basically. So I think there will be concepts and aspects of Bitcoin that will be mirrored in other technologies, but I think, and this is where I become a Bitcoin maximalist, is that Bitcoin is good at doing what Bitcoin does. I don't want Bitcoin to do 20 things. It's not a Swiss Army knife. It's a samurai sword. You know what I mean? It just does one job, and it does it to perfection. So I understand that some people say, well, Bitcoin can't do this and Bitcoin can't do that. But it's a base layer for society. It's a base layer of our economy, and it'll be how everything operates. And it's already a big enough mission, is to destroy fiat. And I think to do it, it's like David and Goliath. You've got to go for the one shot that'll count. You can't be trying to hammer this guy with loads of pebbles. You got to go for one big swing. We get one shot at this. So compromising Bitcoin and its underlying technology, but trying to add the extra pair of scissors, tweezers, and magnifying glasses to this Swiss Army knife isn't the point. You just got to sharpen the samurai sword. And that's what the devs are doing at the moment. And that's what a lot of the Bitcoin maxis think is, no, we're going to war, a peaceful war where we just opt out, but a monetary war. And the only way to win is to have the sharpest tool and to be the best equipped. So, we'll see how everything works out. But our focus of Bull Bitcoin is doing that one job and doing it right. And then after that, everything else is going to seem so much easier. But the money's broken, and we're going to fix it. Yeah.
It's one of the reasons you're okay staying in Canada, because you feel like you've already opted out with your finances, at least with your savings, and psychologically, and maybe even emotionally, because you're in a company that's focused on building the new system. Do you think that's what's kind of keeping you okay with maybe what's going on here and staying here?
Yeah, big time, because I've managed to zoom out. I still see, I was in just this, what am I doing here kind of phase. But then I was like, well, if I'm not happy here, where do I go? I think that's something that people don't really get into. Because during COVID, like a lot of people, I was doing that, well, where do I go? And there's nowhere that's perfect, Yeah, I could move to El Salvador tomorrow and be buying pupusas in Bitcoin and on the Lightning Network. But, your car will get a fine. The roof of your house will leak. There'll be days where you're not doing, life catches up you. Life is life anywhere, right? And I think it's always like this kind of grass is greener syndrome as well. So I could go and run to these places, but I'd rather see it roll out here in Canada, because I'm still bullish on Canada for its nature and its resources and the beautiful seasons we have there and the space we have. There are some things that haven't changed. And I think a lot of Canadians kind of are trying to remember that at the moment, that it still is a great country, even if like a lot of the organization infrastructure is kind of, but that's all temporary. The permanent things of Canada are still there and they're still awesome. There are some things you can't change about Canada, even if you are a terrible prime minister, like, and they're still there, right? So I'm sticking for those reasons. And Bitcoin enabled me to zoom out of that middle layer of crap, which is what we see in the mainstream media, what people get angry about. You know, I've kind of just become a lot more relaxed about it, because I know that things will play out. And even if they don't, I could go anywhere at any point. So I don't feel tied down, which gives me like a nice sense of peace, really. So still really bullish on Canada. I still think in terms of like things like just the energy, like Bitcoin's going to realign the energy grid worldwide, because Bitcoin's money based on energy. We're not on the petrodollar. We'll be based on cheap energy wherever it can be found. And a country like Canada is so well situated. We could pay for schools, roads, and hospitals overnight if we switched onto a Bitcoin standard. If the government just woke up and says, hey, instead of selling energy to compete with the Saudis or the Venezuelans or whatever, selling to the Russians, but we can't because they're on embargo, selling to the States and they'll gouge us, if we just kept it and mined with it, we could generate our own wealth and we could pay for absolutely everything we'd need. We're a totally sovereign nation already.
You think mining Bitcoin would produce that amount of revenue?
Yeah, big time. When you look at the amount of energy that's available in Canada, there are countries like Iceland that are switching onto it because they have an energy surplus, right? They're so far away from Europe and they have all this geo and everything, which is, you know, so they're not getting hit by carbon credits and they have very accessible energy. So they're slowly starting to do that. And El Salvador's mentioned the volcano bonds, which are still to kick off. I mean, obviously, you've got the carbon tax and all of the Green New Deal and all of this kind of net zero kind of things getting in the way of releasing energy. That's a whole different debate. But just in terms of being sat on a huge amount of energy should be an absolute blessing and not a burden. And at the moment, we treat it like a burden because we're just like feeling bad about, well, what do we do? We're just boiling the ocean. If we were to just honestly sit down and say, hey, we've got enough energy that we don't need to export, we just instead mine, I think it could go so far. I mean, like a place like Quebec, it's a 100% hydro-based energy grid, right? It's owned by Hydro-Quebec and it's publicly owned. But what happens with the stranded energy when the cities don't need heating or air conditioning? What happens in the 1.5 hours that it takes to start up a hydroelectric dam? What happens to all of those watts that aren't worth transporting? What happens when we export energy to New England at a loss? Because we've got a surplus and the Boston and New York will buy up cheap energy from us. That's our energy. That's natural resources. These are the future generations that we're trying to protect. But if we're just over-consuming energy and selling it outside of the country to the highest bidder, which is never a high enough price, then we're essentially kind of eroding our own natural resources. A better way to kind of preserve those natural resources would be to save them in Bitcoin, which would be a battery, an energy bank, and you release them in a generation's time. And you build hospitals and roads and transport networks that we want and need now. And all of that stays within the borders of Canada, and we don't depend on anyone. So that journey I was talking to you about wanting to become sovereign and wanting to become a self-made person and wanting to take control and responsibility, it also applies to nation states. Canada could do it tomorrow. Canada could say, we've got enough resources under our feet that we don't need many other countries for much. Because if we've got Bitcoin, we could buy everything else we need from whoever we want. But they're holding on to the Bank of Canada because that's obviously what the people in charge really like. They like their expensive yachts and they like their holidays in Fino and they like being in charge of everything. They don't want to sit down and take a seat at the table. They want to stand up and tell us all what to do. And that's a position of privilege. So they're protecting their hegemony. But it's a shame for people like you and me because we could unleash Canada into being one of the strongest nations in the world if they were to only tap into the Bitcoin standard. But it's a case of early adoption. Are we going to wait for the states to do it and then follow suit? Or are we going to lead? You know, we could really lead. But I don't know. We'll see how it works. Eventually, it will come down to the fact that I will be able to buy a Tim Hortons coffee in Bitcoin. I know it. I know it. But when? I don't know. I don't know.
Yeah. It does just make sense to have a global standard money, because right now we've got, I don't know how many different world currencies, call it like 160 different casino tokens you have to cash in and out of anytime you visit a new country, and then figure out, what prices are in those countries. And like, are you getting ripped off? Is it a good deal? And then the transactions and the exchanges and the remittances, there's no standard. There's no standard measurement of value across the world. And standards really change the world, like standard screw sizes, standard measurement sizes, the metric system, the imperial system, standard, ways of measuring volume, ounces and milliliters and liters. Like, standards allow us all to communicate with each other and actually build large scale different systems based on these different standards of measurement. Yet we don't have one single standard of value. We kind of do with the US dollar, but we don't, because the US dollar is not a stable measurement. It's always getting inflated. So, I mean, Bitcoin's not even necessary if it weren't for human nature and the ability to take advantage of that position of privilege of issuing a currency. Like, if Canada just issued 21 million Canadian tokens, right, we would have a similar thing. It's just not bounded by energy, and there's a lot of perks to Bitcoin above that. But the biggest thing, I think, is just the human nature that we're going to abuse that system, and we're going to skim off the productivity of everybody in the country, and in the US's case, everyone in the world, by printing those extra currency units and stealing the productivity that should be flowing to everybody. Like, we just can't trust human nature, clearly, because it's abused over and over.
Yeah, I think the problem is we've come so used to that abuse, and so used to that. You were talking about like the standards in measurements and information and things, and whenever they're not smoothed out, you have friction, right? If you're trying to convert from measurements is a good one, metric to imperial. Like, if you're building somewhere else, there'll be a bit of friction. You'll have to work it out, calculate some stuff.
Inefficiencies.
But if you can remove that friction, civilization always benefits.
Yep.
So the problem nowadays is that friction in finance, in money, is what we've called the system, and we've accepted it so much that we say, well, that's just the way it is. There's like a huge layer of friction in between these transactions, and most people can't imagine anything else. But can you imagine, on the flip side, if you were to remove all of that friction, what would the potential of the human race be across the world? Because financial friction is one of the biggest frictions that we go through. It's not linguistic. It's not informational. It's not transport-wise. We've kind of nailed everything pretty much to be able to really evolve. But then there's this leech layer of friction that just kind of drains out every bit of inertia from grassroots movements or anything that's a new start. It's really holding us back. So what we try and do is to remove that layer of friction and imagine what it'd be like in the future without any type of friction. And sending Bitcoin to the other side of the world is as easy as sending an email. It really is. So it's electronic cash peer-to-peer system with no middlemen, no friction. It's electronic. It's as fast as electricity. And it's confirmed every 10 minutes by one of the largest computer networks operational, and backed by energy, which is the global currency, is energy at the end of the day. It's not some pieces of paper with queens or presidents or prime ministers on the face of it. Energy is the base layer of what we should be exchanging between each other. And Bitcoin gets closer to that, and it makes it into units and makes it a standardized process where we can exchange energy across the planet. So when seen in that way, like, which is going to win, the friction-filled society or the frictionless society? It's clear, like, it'll just out-accelerate eventually. But obviously, the friction-filled society is now putting extra friction on Bitcoin with regulation, jurisdiction, FUD in the media, fear and doubt, and fear, uncertainty, and doubt. And they're trying to they're playing on the psychology of it. So there's a lot of people out there that think it's for scammers. There's a lot of people think it's illegal. There's a lot of people think it's hyper complex. There's a lot of people thinking a lot of wrong things about Bitcoin. And that's because the bankers and the establishment want to just make it seem like it's more complicated than it is. But actually, it's going to be one of the most frictionless, smooth ways of interacting across the globe that we've ever known. It's going to be a beautiful thing.
Yeah, I totally agree, man. Bull Bitcoin, do you want to shout out any new announcements, any things you guys are working on,
Yeah,
anything at all you want to mention?
yeah, absolutely. We got a few weeks ago, we got our app out. We now have a wallet app, which is called the Bull app. You can download it at the moment on the Google Play Store and soon to be on iOS. It's an insane app. Basically, Francis and the team have worked away on some of the fees in Bitcoin have been a little bit high recently. So this wallet comes with two wallets actually packed in. We have Liquid, which is good for instant payments and small transactions. And then we have an on-chain wallet, and they're both backed up by the same seed phrase. So it's just as simple as a regular Bitcoin wallet, but has more functionality to it. It's good for small payments and large payments. What else are we working on at the moment? Our website's going to get a huge rehaul this summer. That's going to be super interesting. We're going to basically tune it up, make it look a bit more sexy, a bit more functionality in there as well. And then towards the back half of the year, we're going to be announcing launching in some new countries as well. But you'll have to stay tuned to find out which ones and where. Don't worry, Canada, we're not going anywhere. We've just decided to expand out to some new areas. So it's all looking like a really huge year for us. New website, new app, and new countries to operate in, new central banks to get out and destroy. And yeah, it's looking like a great year. And that's just in bull Bitcoin. But in Bitcoin in general, it looks like it's going to be quite an important year as well with everything that's coming out. So we're extremely excited. So if you want to find out any more information, head over to bullbitcoin.com. You can download the app, the Bull Bitcoin app on the Play Store. And also we're on Twitter at bullbitcoin with a little underscore next to it as well. So you can keep up with all of our news. Aside from that, if you're looking for any extra help about how to learn Bitcoin, we just partnered up with Bitcoin Mentor. So you might have heard of BTC Sessions, Ben Perrin, who hosts the greatest content on YouTube in terms of learning how to learn wallets, securing your Bitcoin, all the best habits. You can find that out on his YouTube channel. But we've also partnered up with now this advisor service that they have, where you can book one-on-one sessions with the most clued up professional Bitcoiners. They'll take time over a video call. They'll get you set up with whatever you want to be, whether it be a small hot wallet or whether it be a business and you want a multi-sig or you want to learn how to operate a node. Whatever question you have, the help is now there. People have established the social layer and the educational layer. So the best way to find out about that is to head to bitcoinsupport.com. That's our landing page for Bitcoin mentors, and you can get help through bitcoinsupport.com.
Yeah, amazing. And I guess I also want to call out, so you guys have a web page you set up for Rockstar Real Estate podcast listeners, Rockstar Inner Circle members. That's rockstarbtc.ca. If you go there, the Bull Bitcoin guys are generous enough to offer you $20 free to buy some Bitcoin with when you fund your account. So that's rockstarbtc.ca. And then quick question for you, Pablo, because I haven't dove down this rabbit hole yet. What's the difference between Liquid and Lightning?
Liquid and Lightning, that's a good question. In terms of, they're both layer twos in terms of scaling Bitcoin, but they operate in different ways. Lightning is a lot more, takes a lot more maintenance. You essentially become responsible for, well, there are two ways you can operate within Lightning. You can either manage your own channels. So I could open up a channel with you and we can pass Satoshis between each other or anyone else you're connected with, but it takes a lot of management. Liquid solves that problem a little bit by having pre-assigned nodes. There are 14, 15 computers out there in the network, which will allow you to send Liquid Bitcoin, which is a token backed on Bitcoin, which is easily pegged in and pegged out. But it basically provides low maintenance, low fees transactions. So we offer all three at Bull Bitcoin. We have on-chain, Lightning, and Liquid. You can buy your Bitcoin in those three different ways. We pay the fee on Bitcoin when you buy Bitcoin with us. So you don't have to worry about fees. But in the future, if you wanted to spend it, you might have to work out your own fee structure and it might cost you a little bit. Lightning will solve that problem. We'll be able to send you Lightning and then you can send it to somebody else really quickly. But Lightning comes with some maintenance questions. You've got to be able to upkeep your wallet or trust another company. So we didn't want to do that. Liquid works on a federation of computers. So it's kind of a little bit like Bitcoin, but a little bit like Lightning. It kind of combines those two aspects together. And we'll be giving you a Lightning style experience, but with a bit more sovereignty like Bitcoin on-chain. So it's what we've gone for in terms of the way of bringing quick, small payments to our users. And that's all integrated in the app. And it's super seamless. You can swap between Liquid and Lightning. And you can swap between Liquid and Bitcoin really quickly within a small confirmation time. So it's basically the best way we can scale small transactions at the moment. And
Is that right on the app?
Check it out. Yeah, it is. Yeah,
So right on the app, you can swap in between Liquid, Lightning, or base chain Bitcoin.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Wow. Is there a fee for doing so as you swap between these different networks? There's a
small fee of a couple of Satoshis. It's a very, very, very small fee. It's like not even 1%. It's below 1%. And that's provided by the Atomic Subswaps, is what it's called. It basically pings in and out using like a service provider. So if you're buying a coffee, for example, I use it when I buy coffee in Quebec. There's a coffee shop accept Bitcoin. So I'll pay in Lightning. It'll swap it into, I'll pay in Liquid. It'll swap it into Lightning. And my coffee shop will receive it in Lightning. And it's done all within like a very quick 1 minute transaction, no more.
Oh, wow. Did you set up that coffee shop on?
No, in fact, they just popped up on the map at one point. The guy who owns it, I'll give him a plug. It's the Kogi Cafe, Kogi. He's a surfer, young businessman, spent a lot of time in El Salvador, has a friend who had a coffee shop in El Salvador. So when he came back from traveling, he says, hey, I'm going to accept Bitcoin. So it's kind of like the unofficial Quebec City Bull Bitcoin headquarters. That's why we meet up and spend some Bitcoin, hang out and chat with the owner. He's a great guy. It's a really cool space. So we're eventually going to help bootstrap the business if they need that type of help. If they want to run servers or if they want to offer gift cards is my next maybe venture. So instead of getting like the Tim Hortons, like crappy like loyalty card, you could actually have Satoshis on the card that you can spend either at the coffee or wherever you want. And like your 10th coffee will be paid for and things like that. So these are types of the projects that we're piloting out at the moment. And we're just trying to help out anybody who's pro Bitcoin.
Oh, well, so how does that work? You load the Satoshis onto like a physical card that you swipe and then it transmits those Satoshis?
Yeah, exactly. So it'll be the card will be like a signature, like a cold card or a ledger or whatever, but it'll be on the Lightning Network. And you'll be able to just sign with like an NFC style tap and pay, and it'll just pull the Satoshis out of the wallet for you as a pre-approved. And you can set a limit. So if you have like $100 on there, the limit per tap would be like $5 or $10. So we can control all the parameters. We'll work that out. But I'm kind of like excited about that, maybe in the fall, because I'm also looking at potentially rolling out the Mi Premier Bitcoin education courses. So for people who want to do a kind of like sit down and meet where we talk about Bitcoin. We'll talk about what money is, what problem Bitcoin solves, how does Bitcoin work. We'll be using the Mi Premier Bitcoin, which is the El Salvador diploma that's been rolled out. I want to do some sit down coffee and Bitcoin sessions at this coffee shop so we can, again, have a social layer and go through it. So it's going to be a busy year. Like we're halfway through, but we ain't halfway done. We got a lot more to come.
That's cool, man. And then so for Rockstar Inner Circle members, I think September 10th, and then I forget the date, but I think it's maybe November 13th. Pablo is going to be doing 2 more educational sessions for Rockstar Inner Circle members. That's part of our Investor Advantage series, where about once a month we do a special webinar on some sort of topic, ad hoc topics that come up that are unique, timely, that you won't get anywhere else. So Pablo, I think you've already done 4 this year for Rockstar members. So you got 2 more coming up, September 10th. November 13th. If you remember, you're going to hear all about that. But Pablo, thank you so much, man, for the education, for Rockstar members, for taking the time to jump on this, for everything you guys are doing at Bull Bitcoin, for taking care of Rockstar members the way you guys have, and for spreading the mission and just sharing your thoughts. Thank you, man. We really appreciate it.
Okay, you're more than welcome. We really love you guys. We love all your clients and everybody who comes to us, all the Rockstar members. Really nice family you've got out there. If anybody's got any questions, especially to the Rockstar guys, Pablo@bullbitcoin.com. We really prioritize anybody from the Rockstar team and the family. We already feel that you guys have got a solid platform out there, and we're just really happy to work with you. And thanks for taking the time.
Yeah, of course, man. And then Saturday, October 5th, you and the boys, all the hardcore Bitcoiners.
We'll be out. Yeah, show up.
Guillaume,
it's always
Kevin.
good to shake some hands. Yeah, I think we're getting the whole team out as we did last year. So yeah, if you've got any questions, don't wait till then. But if you do just want to come and say hi and just might have some big projects down the line, you want to plan some stuff, long-term stuff, it'll be the time to sit down. We'll go over everything you need. But yeah, it's always really fun. These events are really badass, and like our booth is always packed. You guys are so interested in Bitcoin, so we love it. We absolutely love it.
Yeah, people might have to throw some elbows to get in close to you guys. You guys have
There's usually a lineup, man. There's a lineup. You're going to have to miss at least one talk to be able to get to see us, because in between the talks, we're just too packed. But
it's packed.
It's the best way. We love the energy and we love your platform. And we love what you, Tom, and Nick are all doing. So, yeah, keep on being rock stars, you guys. It's awesome.
Cool. Okay, Pablo, we'll end it here, but we'll see you soon. September.
See you soon. Take it easy.
Okay, cool. Thanks, buddy.
Hey, thanks for tuning in. You can find every new episode of the Your Life, Your Terms show on all the major streaming platforms. So Spotify, iTunes, Google Play. And if you'd like to get free copies of some of the books that we've put together, like these right here, or some of the reports that we've put together, like these right here, you can find all of those at www.rockstarinnercircle.com. That's www.rockstarinnercircle.com. That's it for now. Until next time, your life, your terms.